Order. Welcome to meeting number 5 of the Standing Committee on Science and Research. Pursuant to the motion of the House of June 18, 2025, the committee is meeting to study the impact of the criteria for awarding federal funding on research excellence in Canada. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. Pursuant to the standing orders, members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Before we continue, I would ask all in-person participants to consult the guidelines written on the cards on the table. These measures are in place to help prevent audio and feedback incidents and to protect the health and safety of all participants, including the interpreters. You will also notice a QR code on the card which links to the short awareness video. I would like to make a few comments for the benefits of the witnesses and the members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either Floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on the Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best as we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. I would like to welcome our witnesses for today for the first panel. We are joined in person here by Imogen Ko, Professor, Department of Chemistry and Biology from Toronto Metropolitan University. We are also joined by Mark Green, Professor from Queen's University. We are joined by Dave Snow, Associate Professor, University of Guelph, by video conference, and also Partnership for Women's Health Research Canada is represented by Tamil Kendall, Director, and it is by video conference. So welcome to all of you. Thank you for appearing before the committee. And all of you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, and then we will go into our round of questioning. So Professor Imogen, we will start with you. You have the floor, 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee, and thank you for inviting me here to speak today. As you know, my name is Dr. Imogen Ko. I'm a professor of chemistry and biology at Toronto Metropolitan University and an affiliate scientist at St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto. I spent much of my career working in Canada's research ecosystem as a researcher, a reviewer, an educator, mentor, and academic leader with a particular scientific research focus on cellular mechanisms of drug uptake, along with an applied academic expertise in how to create inclusive and effective research cultures in science, engineering, and medicine. I've published extensively in both domains in the peer-reviewed literature. With respect to the topic under review, we must ask, what do we mean by research excellence in 2025? For too long, excellence has been defined in narrow and limited ways, missing markers of impact and relevance. Excellence today is understood more broadly, and the highest quality research emerges from systems and teams that are intentionally inclusive, ethically grounded, and reflective of a wide range of perspectives, knowledge, and experience. Research that draws on only a narrow set of voices or approaches is more likely to have blind spots, replicate bias, and produce less impactful results. The evidence base for these comments is extensive, and to ignore this body of scholarship is to compromise Canadian research. Expertise matters, and we should look to evidence and data to help inform our policies. We have painful reminders of what happens when research fails to account for difference. A well-known recent Canadian case is that of physician Dr. Kapoor, who died from the toxic buildup of a cancer drug routinely prescribed for his type of cancer. He carried a genetic variant related to poor drug metabolism, which had not been captured in databases because those databases are typically skewed towards white European heritage populations. And thus his variant was missed in research focused on finding clinical markers of risk. A major study in 2018 found that over 78% of genome-wide association studies were of European descent, while non-European descent represented fewer than 5%. Excluding diversity in research design and practice disadvantages individuals, compromises safety, wastes resources, and lowers the overall quality of the outputs. Every member of this committee has family or friends or constituents, perhaps from very diverse backgrounds and experiences, who are facing or will face challenges such as cancer, dementia, mental health crises, homelessness, disability, food insecurity, underemployment, perhaps even multiples of these. And research is going to be the answer to responding to these challenges, research that addresses the challenges of all Canadians and finds innovative solutions for all Canadians. This is our call as researchers in service to Canada and Canadians. Research excellence, therefore, depends on creating systems and teams that are fair, inclusive, and responsible. Diverse teams are more innovative, with productivity and impact 7% higher than homogeneous teams, according to research. Research that's conducted inclusively is more rigorous, more innovative, and more responsive to society. In other words, more excellent. Federal funding criteria play a critical role in shaping how we define and reward excellence. If criteria remain too narrow, we risk leaving innovation on the sidelines. If criteria are broadened to ensure maximal rigor, impact, ethics, responsibility, and inclusiveness, we strengthen both research and society. Other countries are already moving in this direction. The UK Research Excellence Framework requires evidence of real-world impact. Global initiatives such as the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment and the Leiden Manifesto stress that research quality cannot be reduced to numbers alone. Canada should align with these leading practices. My recommendations to this committee are to support, sustain, and increase investment in a Canadian research ecosystem that seeks and supports the best while updating federal funding criteria so that excellence reflects truly what matters. Reward research that's rigorous, fair, innovative, socially and environmentally responsive, and built on systems where no capable talent is left on the sidelines. Support research that creates inclusive, productive, and creative cultures which drive innovation and where talent thrives. Be intentional about building better and stronger systems of research. Canada's prosperity, health, and security in the decades ahead will depend on the knowledge we generate today. By ensuring that research excellence is defined in ways that are broad, modern, and inclusive, this committee can help Canadian research be both globally competitive and truly excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now proceed to Professor Mark Green from Queen's University. Professor Green, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members for inviting me. Sego, Sebogwegon, Raswaherhan, Dana Mark, Youngyits, Orsanagede, Waganyadan, Green, Dewaxanazare, Gandege, Nide, Waganon. In this traditional Ganyageha introduction, I introduce myself as Mark Green. My Mohawk name is Raswaherha, and I sit with the Turtle Clan in my community of Tynega Mohawk Territory. I'm also a professor of civil engineering, structural engineering, and I was formerly provost at Queen's University. I have a long-standing track record of support from federal and international granting associations. Early in my career, I won a Commonwealth Scholarship to complete my PhD at the University of Cambridge. I returned to Canada on an NSERC postdoctoral fellowship and became a Queen's National Scholar. Subsequently, I've received funding from pretty much all range of programs at NSERC and served on many review panels for both NSERC and CFI. As an engineer with connections to industry and a strong working relationship with the National Research Council, I have a track record of bridging research into application, including building code development, both in Canada and internationally. For research excellence, for most NSERC grants, evaluations are based on 3 broad categories. The first is excellence of the researcher, the second, excellence of the proposed research, and the third, training of highly qualified personnel. In funding decisions, I have found the processes to assess excellence to be rigorous, fair, and collegial. I'd also like to stress that the system is flexible. For example, partnership programs emphasize collaborations with industry and economic development. Additionally, the internationally accepted Declaration on Research Assessment, as mentioned by my colleague, and also acronym of DORA, provides a broader set of criteria to measure excellence that can capture impact on communities, people, and constituents in a way that academic papers and citation numbers simply cannot. The training of highly qualified personnel is particularly important for Canadian society because these former students go on to successful careers in industry, in government, and in academia. As such, we must ensure that all segments of society have equal and equitable opportunities to access such positions. Furthermore, I firmly believe that to develop true leaders in society, it's essential to expand beyond simply the technical expertise and to connect with the human, socioeconomic, and environmental implications of one's work in science and engineering. For the last 2 years, I've had the pleasure of advising NSERC in the role of scholar in residence for Indigenous collaboration, drawing on my research experience as well as my lived experience. All of this is advancing Canada's commitment to reconciliation. For example, we have been adding material on merit criteria as it relates to Indigenous research, and we can share the details with you. This consists both of NSERC-specific work and tri-agency work. Indigenous research is context-specific and generally connected directly to community needs. As such, the results are practical and can have direct impact on people. Sometimes excellence is not the most technical solution, but one that is best suited to meet the needs on the ground. I'm sure many of you as MPs can relate to the importance of research being implemented to directly improve the lives of your constituents. The new Indigenous Innovation and Leadership and Research grants have created a real breakout moment. In particular, it encouraged focused, Indigenous-led work to deeply reflect on criteria to achieve excellence. One way to do this is to recognize the importance of Indigenous knowledges and community input. We need all types and perspectives of knowledge to achieve true impact. In closing, I would like to emphasize 3 points. 1, the importance of supporting a diverse community of students and researchers who are reflective of the breadth of Canadian society. 2, ways to intertwine Indigenous and Western scientific knowledge to achieve expanded excellence and insights. And 3rd, to embrace the Declaration on Research Assessment to allow for more impactful research for Canadians. Nyawa, thank you, merci.
We will now proceed to Associate Professor Dave Snow. He is joining us through video conference. Floor is yours. You will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I am here to speak to whether modifications should be made to the criteria used for awarding federal funding for research at the 3 federal granting agencies, NSERC, CIHR, and SSHRC. I should begin by saying that I am not a disinterested observer. My career has benefited immensely from receiving SSHRC awards as a graduate student and as a political science professor. I believe that federally funded granting agencies are vital to the development of high-quality research in a thriving post-secondary sector in Canada. With that said, I am here to discuss a major concern with respect to the funding criteria at the 3 granting agencies, the creeping integration of principles of equity, diversity, and inclusion, or EDI, into those agencies' remit. Earlier this year, I conducted a study for the Macdonald-Laurier Institute on EDI at Canada's 3 granting agencies. My report, which is the first quantitative study of Tri-Council research grants that I'm aware of, found that EDI has become infused into these granting agencies, particularly SSHRC and CIHR, and that an increasingly large share of SSHRC grants have been awarded to activist EDI projects. Examples of EDI at the agencies include an EDI action plan for all 3 agencies, mandatory diversity and bias training modules for applicants and peer reviewers, specialized EDI grants framed in activist language, such as the Shifting Dynamics of Privilege and Marginalization grant, and CIHR's new definition of research excellence that urges research to be, quote, anti-racist, anti-ableist, and anti-colonial in approach and impact. Now, troublingly, I found that granting agencies use equity, diversity, and inclusion in different ways at different times to mean different things. Sometimes it is what I call mild EDI, which merely encourages diverse perspectives in research and which I broadly support. Other times, the term EDI is simply used as a synonym for affirmative action. However, I found granting agencies EDI language increasingly reflects what I call activist EDI, whereby the terms equity, diversity, and inclusion are used to advance the particular political agenda of social justice activism, in the words of Professor Eric Kaufman, who I believe is speaking later today, to overthrow systems of structural racism, sexism, homophobia, and transphobia. Now, this vague and shifting definition of EDI is a feature, not a bug. It enables researchers and granting agencies to hide behind mild EDI language while using taxpayer dollars to advance activist EDI research agendas. And there are two reasons why the growth of activist EDI at the granting agencies is especially problematic. First, activism undermines the search for truth. Actual SSHRC grant application instructions have asked applicants questions such as, quote, how can cisgender and straight masculinity be reinvented for a gender equitable world? Now, this is in direct opposition to what granting agencies should do. Fund research based on intellectual curiosity to be undertaken by researchers who do not yet know the answer to the questions they're asking. Instead, activist EDI-driven criteria shift research funding away from objective knowledge creation towards intellectually incurious research that first and foremost seeks to advance a political agenda rather than discover new knowledge. Second, the growth of activist EDI undermines the legitimacy of the granting agencies themselves and of the post-secondary sector more broadly. If these agencies are seen as rewarding political projects, then Canadians, and their members of parliament for that matter, will start to ask whether the roughly $4 billion spent annually by these agencies could be better spent elsewhere. Now, my report makes several recommendations for reform, some of which require legislation, but most of which can be done within the relevant ministry or even within the agencies themselves. In particular, I recommend that the agency's enabling legislation should be amended to enshrine a commitment to political and ideological neutrality. To ensure such neutrality, I also recommend that all references to EDI should be removed from agency guidelines and criteria. This includes the elimination of many of SSHRC's EDI-focused grants. The net effect of the granting agency's trend towards EDI has been to weaken their perceived political independence and reinforce the impression that they too have become politicized. Yet, that harm is not irreparable. The granting agencies remain committed in principle to research excellence and objective knowledge creation. By removing EDI from their remit, we can ensure that fostering research excellence rather than political activism remains their top priority. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now proceed to Ms. Kendall, representing Partnership for Women's Health Research Canada. Ms. Kendall, you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. Please go ahead.
Madam Chair and honorable standing committee members, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. As noted, I'm the director of the Partnership for Women's Health Research Canada, which unites the Women's Health Research Institute in BC, the Women and Children's Health Research Institute in Alberta, Women's College Hospital in Ontario, and IWK Health. On behalf of the partnership, I would like to make 3 points about how diversity and inclusion in research and science contribute to research excellence. First, ensuring diversity and inclusion in research populations is critical for research relevance. For example, in health, some pain medications work better if you have one X chromosome male rather than 2 X chromosomes female. We now know that individual cells have a sex, and thus treatments need to be tailored accordingly, such as pain. Over a 4-year period in the United States, 8 of 10 drugs that were withdrawn from market were because of negative side effects in women, because not enough females were included in the trials that led to approval. One of these drugs, Propulsid, was withdrawn because it caused irregular heartbeat, arrhythmias, more frequently in women. This drug caused the death of Vanessa Young, a 15-year-old Canadian, and resulted in Vanessa's Law, which aims to improve post-market drug surveillance and increase transparency about who was included in clinical trials. But if we're to move beyond and prevent health harms because of sex differences before they occur, as in the tragic case of Vanessa, sex differences must be studied. In Canada, research excellence requires an increase from the current 7% of health research dollars allocated to women's health research and greater accountability for sex and gender analysis and reporting. Canada is a global policy leader in promoting sex and gender health research, but we need to increase accountability by researchers for the commitments they make at the research proposal stage. Recommendations that we make align with greater calls for grant monitoring made by other expert witnesses. In our written brief, we make concrete recommendations, including establishing a public repository of all published findings for funded projects. Sex, gender, and ethnicity of study participants should be reported in all studies and in all publications. And funding applications should include a section where applicants are required to report on sex and gender results from previous government-funded research. Second, as noted by others, socio-demographic diversity within research teams is associated with research excellence when we look at novel research questions and higher research output. This committee has discussed viewpoint diversity, and we know that our viewpoints and the research questions we ask are influenced by our personal experiences and background. To illustrate, Black scientists are more likely to study health disparities than white scientists. Female scientists are more likely to study research questions that use female and male sex in all research. Diverse scientists asking and answering relevant questions and working together in research groups that include people of different genders and ethnicities contributes to research excellence. In the science and research environment, there is exhaustively documented inequitable treatment of females and people of color. Programs to increase equity in science and research can increase fairness and diversity without undermining merit-based evaluation. In Canada, before the introduction of the equity mandates for the Canada Research Chairs, the vast majority of nominees were senior male candidates, and other merit-based applications were not included in the competitions. The government changing the requirements of inclusion increased the diversity of candidates, but did not change the excellence of the candidates as measured by peer-reviewed publications, science communication, book chapters, patents, or policies. The CRC program is still a meritocracy, and increased diversity results in better, more impactful science that ultimately improves the lives of Canadians. Third, to assess research excellence, we should focus on scientific content and impact to patients, families, and communities, rather than number of publications and journal impact factors. When the research improves outcomes, implements health technology, or evaluates health system change across a diverse population, then the impact is sustainable and generalizable to all Canadians. Investing in women's health research and integration of sex and gender across care and innovation can make Canada a magnet for the world's top scientists and entrepreneurs, and also lower costs through better evidence-based prevention and treatment for all Canadians, helping them get ahead. Thank you very much.
Now we will proceed with our round of questioning, and we will begin our first round with MPD Ryder. Please go ahead. You will have 6 minutes. I would request all the members to please be particular about time, because we had 4 witnesses, and so that everyone can get the chance. So I will be particular about the time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. Mr. Snow, you come from Guelph. I'm in Waterloo Region myself. Thank you for being here. My question will be with you today. You spoke quite a bit about political activism with the current ideologies in federal funding agencies of research and academia. but you did give us a glimpse of hope that the harm today is not reparable, but we must take action. If we as the government do not take action now, what will be the repercussions in our scientific community, especially in areas like Waterloo, where we still do have science excellence happening today?
Well, thank you for the question. I think it's a really important one. And the first thing I should say is that, I am a social scientist, a political scientist, and so my knowledge of, for example, the hard science environment in places like Waterloo is not particularly high, but I do think I would emphasize something I touched on briefly towards the end, which is that I think these granting agencies, mostly fund a great deal of research, and I found far more limited evidence of this activist EDI at NSERC, for example. But I think in an era of increased financial restraint, of large budget deficits, that the perception, and as I've shown in my report, the at times justified perception that what these agencies are doing is not funding objective new knowledge, not funding knowledge creation, but instead funding ideological projects where activists are just continuing to do activism, but with more federal government money. Then I think the appetite from the public and from legislators is going to be to move away from this and saying that's an area where I think we can and should cut. And I think that would be a shame. So that's why I'm suggesting reform to avoid those potential cuts down the line.
I agree completely. I think too there's a risk of losing faith in our service, in our research excellence, and losing really not having any trust in our science anymore if we continue down these paths. And that's what I wanted to bring up with you today. In the Waterloo region, we have very good scientific achievements happening, but I'm afraid that'll be eroded in time if we continue down this path, these ideological paths. Can you explain further where that would have that erosion in science if we continue down this course?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, first and foremost, the sort of creeping integration of more EDI activist requirements into large-scale grants is an issue. So if we want to fund the best research, we should fund the best research. We shouldn't fund the best research that also makes vague commitments to activist EDI and base research funding for things like hard science and engineering's projects on the basis of those statements. But I also think, and again, I'm seeing this less in NSERC, more in SSHRC, and surprisingly more in CIHR than I expected in terms of its guidelines anyway, is that we're actually carving out research dollars for explicitly activist projects in the social sciences and humanities in particular. So we're not only saying that we encourage researchers to build their research proposals in such a way that makes a nod to equity, diversity, and inclusion, is more likely to be funded if it's equity, diversity, inclusion. But we're actually taking scarce taxpayer dollars and saying these grants are only for activist projects. And if you look at the language in things like the knowledge synthesis grants at SSHRC and the Race, Gender, and Diversity Initiative, which has ended, but it was quite a large sum of money and a lot of $450,000 grants, that's what I found overwhelmingly within those grants. The percentages I found of activist projects being within the SSHRC Main Insight grants was between 10 and 15% with explicitly activist language in its title. Now, that's a lot higher than I think should be coming from a federal granting agency, but it's not 100. With those more explicitly activist grants, it was more like 2/3 in terms of that. So I think that first and foremost, we pare down the guidelines, we maintain a commitment to ideological and political neutrality, and we say that we're going to stop carving out scarce taxpayer resources for grants that are about activism. If the government wants to fund activism, it can fund activism. It shouldn't be doing it through its research granting agencies.
Thank you very much for that. One last thing is I'm going to cite you here for a second. In Canada, EDI is currently taking up far too much focus in each of the granting agencies rather than prioritizing research excellence, and they're too often promoting and even rewarding political activism. You drew me right into this exact site here. To you, what is the most critical step to reduce politicalization in academia and to ensure we're funding authentic research?
Yeah, that is a great question because it raises the question of whether or not these granting agencies are upstream or downstream of broader tendencies within academia, especially the social sciences and humanities, towards more ideological research and less.
Sorry for interrupting. Time is up. Maybe you can respond in the next round. So now we will proceed to MP McKelvey. MP McKelvey, you will have 6 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. My first question is for Dr. Green. You mentioned interdisciplinary research, which I think many of the great discoveries that we're going to have happen when different people that might not traditionally work together come together. A great example of that is understanding our microbiome. And, medical scientists have been looking at from one direction, but you could throw in a soil scientist who's used to analyzing more of that type of substrate, and then you could throw in an anthropologist and a dietitian or somebody that looks at culture. Now, culture changes, what we eat. Those three would all traditionally be funded from a separate agency, so NSERC versus SHRC versus CIHR. So recognizing that this study that's before us is about research excellence, how can we better promote research excellence when it's interdisciplinary?
Thank you very much for that question. And I do wholeheartedly agree with you that many of the greatest innovations that we do achieve those when we are considering a very interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary approach, so we can see how the different systems connect with one another and how they influence each other. And I will also mention that is also quite reflective also of many indigenous worldviews, which does not separate into disciplines in the same way. So if one's thinking of, for example, a frame of reference would be the medicine wheel that looks at, it can often be a metaphor for health with the different parts, and looking at those 4 segments, you need each and every one of those physical, mental, spiritual health to be in harmony in order to have those connections. Similarly, I know as Haudenosaunee peoples, the Ahondagari Wadekwa, or the words that come before all else, or the Thanksgiving address, also talks in all of that giving thanks for all of the elements of creation, and in that recognizing that it's only when each and every element there is contributing its own responsibility does everything work well together. So let's maybe deviate a little bit from that and talk a little bit about some practical applications of it, something that falls into my area of research as an example. I've done a lot of work in structural engineering, and last 20, 25 years I've done a lot of work in fire engineering, and recently interested in wildfires, and we understand what a problem that is for Canadians in general and across the world, but is particularly impact on First Nations and other Indigenous communities, where over 40% of First Nations communities are those who are evacuated, when it's only representative of about 5% of the population. But in looking at that and focusing on ways to do that, working with, right now with Prince Albert Grand Council, they're interested in, well, how do these displacements, how can you protect the communities from what I'm interested in and protect the people there, but also how does it affect their mental health by being displaced and other things. And so really, and I've also engaged now with medical professionals to look at that. And so by bringing together this wide range, I think we can have much better solutions.
So in that, though, you very eloquently outlined the 3 ways that, for example, NSERC looks at excellence, so excellence of the researcher, proposed research, and HQP. But on excellence of the researcher, for example, it's defined very differently with Indigenous knowledge and with Indigenous keepers. So how can we be mindful about the way we are assessing research excellence when we're working with different communities? Because doing it based on publications, for example, that's not the right measure. So how can we make sure that we're including research excellence when it may not have a traditional metric?
Yes, thanks for bringing up that about cultural leaders and cultural knowledge, in a way, having the expertise. And there is some movement to be looking at recognizing that knowledge that exists through those oral traditions, through other knowledge that does not exist outside of that place knowledge and those systems. So it's actually different perspectives, different knowledge, and it can also bring with it a lot of changes and understandings. There are ways then to look at, well, what is the impact in community? How are these people recognized in community? Many of the people who have this knowledge, they may not have traditional education, but they are respected for their knowledge because they are knowledge keepers, et cetera. So there are many other ways of looking more broadly, and certainly those are the things in working with the Indigenous Leadership Circle on Research, which is a national body, as well as a reference group on appropriate review of Indigenous research. Both of those bodies are looking closely at those types of ways of.
I won't say much with 15 seconds except to congratulate you both on your NSERC Scholar in Residence positions, and thank you for your contributions.
Thank you. Yeah.
To MP Blanchet-Jonca, please go ahead. You will have 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Salut.
Thank you, Chair. Greetings to the witnesses. First question goes to Professor Snow. We usually mixed up two things. Representative samples in health, for example, researchers embodied that diversity. You see, this confusion is at the source of current policies. What are the risks of mixing up those two indicators? Does it not change the criteria that is imposed on individuals?
I'm sorry, I heard that the first was representative samples within health. I missed what the second one was.
Donc, je répète, est-ce que ça ne transforme
Does this not transform scientific criteria into some things that are imposed on individuals?
So the translation, and I apologize for my unilingualism, the translation was that does this not transform the criteria? But I still I didn't get from the question what specifically it is that transforms this. So I apologize. Maybe I'll get you to repeat one more time.
Je vous répète, est-ce que ça ne
Does this not transform a scientific issue into an ideological criteria that is being imposed on individuals?
Yes, absolutely, and I apologize. I definitely got it this time. I think it absolutely does transform what ought to be the domain of objective knowledge creation into an ideological issue. And I should say I oppose, all ideologically based grant funding, whether that's in a progressive or a conservative direction. And I'll note that. I'd say that some of the other witnesses today, others might portray as being sort of on the other side of the issue here. But I know that there's a lot of things that I heard from the witnesses today that I think are valuable forms of diversity and inclusion, of having a greater research population in terms of medical and health research in order to learn more knowledge. That's outside my field of expertise, but that's something absolutely granting agencies should be encouraging. What they shouldn't be encouraging are particularly politicized projects that already know the answer to the questions before they've begun the research. And so I was surprised both at the types of questions on actual SSHRC grant applications. So one, for example, contested cultural and historical narratives can reinforce communal tensions and lead to alienation, denialism, and marginalization. That is from a SSHRC grant instructions applications, and it is telling researchers there are things that should not be contested, which is very much against the domain of science. Science is all about contestation.
Si vous me permettez, je vais poursuivre mes questions. Dans vos travaux,
Mr. Snow, in your work in McDonnell-Laurier, you have insisted on the fact that opportunity should be given to researchers to do research and avoid imposing DEI in project assessment. Why do you think that it's important to establish that distinction?
I think it's a very important distinction because what I found in my study is that these three types of EDI, I call it, mild EDI, what I call moderate EDI, but more or less affirmative action, and then the more activist EDI, they're used interchangeably. SHRC and NSERC don't say that we're talking about the first type of EDI here, and now we're talking about the second one. And so we can speak in the broad language of research inclusion and more inclusive research environments. And quite frankly, I think that's going on anyway within Canadian academia. I think we've moved away from the days where populations are systematically excluded and reviewers, if you've met any academics who are explicitly sexist or racist, I think those days are far, far behind us. And so I think that the forms of inclusive research environments that we want to foster are being fostered without these EDI criteria regardless. What these EDI criteria are doing are they're encouraging researchers to engage in politicized research, and they're also taking a particular portion of scarce federal research dollars and saying only for this type of activist research and not for the research that builds knowledge.
Bien compris. Vous avez montré que...
Understood. You've shown that in thematic programs, there's DEI. About 63% of projects funded were DEI projects. Does this not mean that federal funding is not encouraging ideological ideas instead of open research?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that for these specific grants, so these knowledge synthesis grants, which are smaller, but still, millions of dollars of federal money, and for the Race, Gender, and Diversity Initiative in particular, from SHRC, they has questions on the application instructions that say which mechanisms perpetuate white privilege and how can such privilege best be challenged. Now, I also think white privilege is a bad thing, but it's not, is there evidence of white privilege? Where is there evidence of white privilege and where isn't there? It assumes that white privilege exists, that there are mechanisms to perpetuate it, and that the goal of federally funded research ought to be challenging those mechanisms. Again, a statement from SHRC: progressive societies promote the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion as enriching societies culturally, informing innovation and research. Again, here's the assumption that we want a society that defines itself as progressive, and that's the direction of research dollars. So I think one needs only to skim the websites of those specific grants to see just how ideologically loaded. I think most Canadians would be shocked at how explicitly ideological the language is on those EDI-specific grants, not necessarily on every granting agency website and criteria.
Merci. Vous écrivez que les...
Thank you. You say that DEI, that is activist, is taking funds away from real research. Do you think that this is undermining innovation in Canada?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that it's a logical implication of my work that if I'm finding between 10 to 15% of the most prestigious SHRC grants, the Insight grants and Insight Development grants, have explicitly activist EDI language in their title alone. The abstracts
Sorry for
weren't
interrupting.
available.
Time is up for. Okay, we will now start our second round of questioning, and we will go to MP Holman for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. dreamed of a world where people are judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. That principle has always guided me, and many of the people of London Fanshawe feel that current DEI policies are taking us further from it. They want opportunities based on merit and ability. Yet academics warn that funding rules are closing doors and rewarding conformity instead of excellence. I hope this study helps us find a better path and restores fairness, protects freedom, and ensures taxpayer dollars support the best ideas. My question is for Dr. Snow. You mentioned in your piece from the Macdonald-Laurier Institute that the current federal government, which you hold responsible for the DEI push, is not interested in rolling back DEI. What would you say are the most dire consequences of granting agencies and post-secondary institutions continuing down this DEI path?
Thank you for the question. And I should note that this report came out in February of 2025. And so when speaking about the current government, of course, it was still a Liberal government, but it was under a different prime minister. I'm unaware of any shift or maintenance in terms of the current government's priorities in terms of this language. So I guess we'll have to wait and see. But I think that and perhaps I say this, perhaps I'm biased in saying this as an academic and as someone who has spent his entire adult life in the university, but I worry that it contributes to the undermining of our post-secondary institutions. I think when people see this type of language, quite frankly, when people hear the amount of money, right? When I tell, bright people I know who aren't engaged in the post-secondary sector that these granting agencies distribute $4 billion and more a year, they're shocked. Now, that doesn't mean that that is not a good use of taxpayer dollars, but quite frankly, these sorts of activist projects are the ones that make the headlines more than even within the social science sort of really knowledge-creating, objective, falsifiable research. So I think it speaks to a potential and growing disillusion with the post-secondary sector amongst the Canadian public, and that's what I worry about the most, because these agencies do very important work, but these particular grants are unfortunately undermining it.
Thank you for that, Dr. Snow. I share your concerns, and I know many Canadians also. In that same piece, you provide several recommendations for reversing the effects of DEI. Can you tell more about the reforms you believe would restore genuine openness, protect diversity of opinion, and ensure merit and freedom of thought before ideological conformity?
Yes, absolutely. And the first one, and it's small. It would be a line in two different pieces of, or three different pieces of legislation, which is just committing the federal granting agencies to political and ideological neutrality. And if it's in their legislative mandate, it would make it difficult, of course not impossible, but difficult for the agencies to go down with these explicitly politicized grants. In addition, I recommend obviously eliminating these explicitly EDI-focused grants, which quite frankly, I think most people who hear about them are in agreement with that recommendation. But perhaps a little more controversially, I recommend removing all references to equity, diversity, and inclusion from the granting agency's website and supporting materials because of the slippage, because calls for inclusion in a research team can move to calls for political activism so quickly. And so I think that some of the things the other witnesses spoke about today, about saying we want grants that have, for example, that study diverse populations, we can put that in granting criterias without having the language of EDI and EDI action plans transposed over all three granting agencies. So I think we can be more targeted and more specific about what we're looking for, and that the language of EDI doesn't allow us to do that. It's so fuzzy, it enables researchers to sort of move in any direction, and most troublingly, in an activist direction with their research.
Thank you. In previous testimony, we have heard stories from academics who have seen DEI policies inhibit the careers of budding academics who do not fit the DEI mold. We have also heard stories about these policies being used to bolster the careers of established academics at the expense of young academics. What message do you think it sends to young Canadian researchers if they learn that conformity to an ideology matters more than the strength of their ideas? Dr. Snow?
I think that the most important and unfortunate message it sends is that you are going to get more research money and more prestige if you perform this type of research. And so what I'm dismayed often to see is excellent young graduate students who could be at the frontiers of science and social sciences, studying arcane, EDI-focused language with no potential impact.
Time is up. So we will now proceed to MP Rana for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you very much all the witnesses spending your valuable time with us. And very glad to see you, Professor Ko, as I'm also a TMU former student. And very glad to see you as you are a civil engineer. I'm also a civil engineer. Lots of things. So I know lots of work is being done in research, and especially in civil engineering and transportation engineering. And you mentioned structural engineering and environmental and also technical engineering. But my question is, what benefits do you witness from NSERC's NED initiative?
From the
EDA initiative, NSERC's.
from NSERC's initiatives overall?
Yes.
Well, certainly there are great impacts for industry and Canadian knowledge and scientific excellence. Yeah. And I know there's quite a bit of discussion by social scientists about the importance of scientific research, but certainly internationally respected research in both science and engineering is flourishing in Canada, and certainly my colleagues at the University of Waterloo are doing some of the top research in those areas, also supported well by NSERC funds, both in engineering and the other physical sciences. I have also found that some of the change, particularly with regard to making certain that we are supporting a wide range of highly qualified personnel. It's usually what we use for our graduate students, et cetera, to make certain that those who have been traditionally underrepresented, certainly in engineering, there is a real challenge with having very low proportion of women in engineering, trying to get so we might have 30% women engineers by 2030. We're not going to achieve that, but that's kind of a low target that we're looking for. There are massive things in society that are affected by not having gender parity and other things in that workforce, that critical workforce that's building almost everything that we use in our society, building all of the tech devices and everything. So these are slants that it is really important that we have these broad viewpoints and everybody in society contributing well to it. So those are important parts to having those elements, particularly in areas where there are groups, women, for example, racialized minorities, Indigenous people in some of these areas that can see that this could be an opportunity for them. And there have been market changes by people taking some actions to change those directions and encourage more people in those areas. I think between that range of things that NSERC is doing, I think it's working quite well.
Federal government funding criteria will bring more women and Indigenous in civil engineering, especially in civil engineering field, because we don't see too many women in civil engineering field.
Certainly, you're right. There are lower proportions of women in civil engineering, although partly in, say, the environmental aspects of civil engineering, et cetera. These are areas. And we're having more, even in our universities, we are having more women professors. At Waterloo, Mary Wells is the Dean of Engineering there. Charmaine Dean is, as a woman, is the Vice President of Research leading that. So very strong. I was just at McMaster last week to welcome my colleague, Susan Tai, who is the new president at McMaster, got a special congratulations and invitation from our Premier, Doug Ford, in that message for everything that she's doing for Ontario in advancing science and infrastructure and civil engineering in Canada. So these are things that are incredible to see that are also part of some of these broader initiatives.
Cool. What are some of the major EDA initiatives that you implemented and you found very successful?
Building on what Dr. Green has said, I think NSERC has really raised the awareness of the fact that there is talent being left on the sidelines, and that's a deficit, that's a cost to Canada. So I think we want to be really ensuring that we are mobilizing talent and we're creating those inclusive cultures deliberately and intentionally so that we can leverage that creativity and that talent.
Sorry for interrupting, time is up. We will now proceed to Mr. Blanchet-Jonca for 2.5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Madame la Présidente, Professeur Snow.
Thank you. You mentioned that some institutions are defining excellence as being anti-racist, anti-colonial, and opposed to discrimination based on handicap. And the Human Resources Council is focusing on ideologies. Are they not turning away from their primary objective, which is to fund research irrespective of its orientation?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think that's exactly right. And I think this is CIHR in particular, the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, whose definition of research excellence includes language of inclusivity within it, includes language of diversity within it. But in particular, its page on research excellence, its research excellence framework says that research is excellent when it's inclusive, equitable, diverse, anti-racist, anti-ableist, and anti-colonial in approach and impact. Now, probably most of us would say, I'm not ableist, I'm not racist, I'm not a colonialist, and those are good things. But these terms in academia, as someone who's familiar with progressive academia, these are very specific frameworks, often unfalsifiably formed, that have a particular way of looking at the world and are not first and foremost about knowledge creation. They're built on particular assumptions about how society is governed and how it ought to be changed. And when you adopt that as your framework for all health and medical funding across the country, you're going to necessarily discourage certain forms of knowledge creation and encourage activist research that is not designed to help us achieve better medical and health outcomes and knowledges. Just by, I heard a presentation earlier today talk about how we don't want to leave anyone on the sidelines. Well, this is leaving scholars on the sidelines who don't use an anti-racist, anti-ableist, and anti-colonial approach in their hard science research on health and medicine. And so I think, if I had one recommendation of what should go within the agencies, it would be that component of that research excellence framework from the beginning.
Merci. Rapidement, quelque chose à rajouter?
Anything to add about scientific competitiveness in Canada and DEI criteria? Anything to add to that?
I would just say that in terms of how competitive these particular scholarships are, we would have a greater number of people able to get the grants designed towards research excellence if we were to remove some of these EDI criteria in the grants themselves.
Sorry for interrupting. Time is up. We will have a quick 1 minute.
Madam Chair, could we request the professor to send us written answers to the questions we just asked?
Can you please repeat?
Une réponse écrite au professeur.
Could you ask Professor Snow to provide written answers to my last question, please?
If the witnesses are not able to complete their answers, you can always send written submissions, and those will be incorporated while we go through the drafting of the report, and it will be circulated to all the members. We will now have quick 1 minute for Mr. Ho, and then 1 minute for MP Jessic. Please, MP Ho, you have 1 minute.
And my question is for Professor Snow. I'm going to go back to the basics. DEI is supposed to create this, fair and inclusive environment that is supposed to address injustices of marginalized groups. Do you think that it actually has the opposite of effect of actually marginalizing those who don't adhere to a certain ideological viewpoint?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that sort of especially what I call the more activist form of EDI has that effect. I don't doubt that decades ago, requirements for inclusion or suggestions for inclusion had the effect of bringing people in. But I think we're increasingly seeing, and you've seen witnesses this week talk about how we're excluding particular types of research by this. What I see in the EDI requirements is a narrowing in terms of the scope of federally funded research in the areas where EDI applies, and that's really the opposite of what EDI was supposed to originally be about.
Just like every liberal policy, it achieves the opposite disastrous effect. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. We will now go to MP Jessic for a quick 1 minute round.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Dr. Kendall, you've heard Professor Snow and some of his criticisms around EDI. Are you aware of this activist EDI agenda that is apparently there in Professor Snow's opinion to promote a political agenda? Have you seen any of this in the work that you've been doing?
I must say that I don't believe that there is an activist agenda in trying to figure out how we can make our health services and our health research welcoming to populations that experience racial discrimination, that experience ableism, and that experience a history of colonialism. So I think that these structural issues are important to address, and that research that addresses them moves us forward in promoting the health of all Canadians. Thank you.
That I would take a moment to thank all the four witnesses. Yes, MP De Ruyter.
I just have two quick questions. Number one is, can Mr. Snow table his report on the research that you had talked about today?
If you can direct the question to me,
I apologize, Chair.
because time is up. So yes,
to table the report, and I was also wondering if we can get a list from Mr. Snow, please, on the academic grant title examples to the committee that he identified as activist or ideological.
Okay,
please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Snow, if you can submit that, that would be great. I want to thank all the four witnesses for their appearance before the committee and providing the important testimony. And I will suspend the meeting for a few minutes so that we can allow the second round people to take their places. So the meeting is suspended. I would like to make few comments for the benefit of the new witnesses. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic. And please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For this panel, I would like to welcome our witnesses. We are joined by Dr. Nadia Hassan, Assistant Professor, School of Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Study, York University, and she's joining us by video conference. Professor Eric Kaufman from University of Buckingham by video conference. Special thanks to you for joining from all the way from there. We are joined by Gad Saad, visiting scholar, Declaration of Independence Center for the Study of American Freedom, University of Mississippi, by video conference. Thank you. And our fourth witness for today is Society for Academic Freedom and Scholarship, being represented by their president, Mr. Robert Thomas. All the witnesses will have 5 minutes for the opening remarks, and we will start with Mr. Saad, because he requested to start first. So please go ahead. Floor is yours. You will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Okay, here we go. Many thanks for the invitation to participate in this important discussion. Meritocracy is the sole operative ethos when judging research excellence. Scientific quests have a singular goal: to better understand the world and its wondrous mysteries. Science is not an empathy party meant to elevate and celebrate so-called marginalized groups. The use of diversity, inclusion, and equity when allocating research funds is an affront to individual dignity and to research excellence. A 2025 report by the Aristotle Foundation found that 97.5% of academic job postings at Canadian universities referenced diversity, inclusion, and equity. I will discuss briefly 3 such examples from my chapter in The War on Science. First example, the University of Waterloo's School of Computer Science recently advertised for 2 open NSERC Tier 1 Canada research chairs, and I quote their call. Position 1 in all areas of artificial intelligence. The call is open only to qualified individuals who self-identify as women, transgender, gender fluid, non-binary, or two-spirit. Second position in all areas of computer science. The call is open only to qualified individuals who self-identify as a member of a racialized minority, close quote. Second example from the University of British Columbia for a Tier 1 Canada research chair in oral cancer research. Quote, the selection will be restricted to members of the following federally designated groups: people with disabilities, Indigenous people, racialized people, women, and people from minoritized gender identity groups, close quote. Third example, from my own university, Concordia University, researchers there obtained a New Frontiers in Research grant to decolonize light. On their website, they explain, quote, the Decolonizing Light project explores ways and approaches to decolonize science, such as revitalizing and restoring indigenous knowledge and capacity building, close quote. The Decolonize Light project is congruent with the 5-year strategic plan of Concordia University to decolonize and indigenize the entire curriculum and pedagogy. Apparently, science has suffered for too long from a whiteness problem. Canadian medicine has also succumbed to this parasitized ideological capture, as I discuss in my forthcoming book, Suicidal Empathy. The anti-racism expert working groups of CanMeds, which develops evolving training codes for physicians and surgeons in Canada, concluded that, quote, a new model of CanMeds would seek to center values such as anti-oppression, anti-racism, and social justice rather than medical expertise, close quote. If you suffer from an aggressive cancer, It might be comforting to know that your oncologist is trained to, quote, combat the historical and ongoing structures of racism, white supremacy, settler colonialism, heteropatriarchy, capitalism, ableism, classism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, and more, close quote. I end by quoting from my book, The Parasitic Mind. Quote, science is or should be an apolitical process. Scientific truths and natural laws exist independent of researchers' identities. The distribution of prime numbers does not change as a function of whether the mathematician is a white heterosexual Christian man or a transgendered Muslim obese individual. The periodic table of elements is not dependent on whether a chemist is a Latinx queer or a cis-normative Hasidic Jew. Oh, you are a non-binary bisexual chemist? Well, this completely changes the atomic numbers of carbon, palladium, and uranium, close quote. Ideological activism is anathema to research excellence. Meritocracy is all that matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Saad. Now we will proceed to Dr. Nadia Hassan. Dr. Hassan, you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. You can please go ahead.
Thank you for inviting me to speak today. As mentioned, my name is Dr. Nadia Hassan, and I'm an assistant professor at the School of Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies. I'm also the director of the Islamophobia Research Hub at York University in Toronto. I have nearly 20 years of experience working at the intersection of academic and community-based research through both nonprofit organizations and post-secondary institutions. Today, I want to talk about two things. First, the importance of funding research that deepens our understanding of and helps us combat racism, hate, and discrimination in all its forms. And second, how federal funding can strengthen meaningful partnerships with communities. We're having this conversation in a troubling global context. In the United States, the targeting of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives has brought with it a dismantling of academic freedom itself. This has led to restrictions so sweeping that terms such as climate, woman, peanut allergies, safe drinking water have made their way onto banned words lists in federal agencies, according to outlets like the New York Times, the Washington Post, and PEN America, who also report that this has already resulted in failed or rescinded research grants. This type of political censorship undermines democracy, limits innovation, and stifles critical scholarship. It is a cautionary tale for Canada and a reminder that our federal agencies, and this committee in particular, must resist these chilling trends. Let me begin with my first point: why Canada must continue to fund research that addresses racism and discrimination. The evidence is strong that diversity in research ecosystems results in more innovation and better research impact. So, for example, research on Black maternal health, an area that has been long ignored in the research community, uncovered systemic inequities that led to new initiatives reducing infant and maternal mortality. Indigenous-led scholarship has revealed the devastating impacts of colonial violence, language loss, cultural erasure, implications for health and safety, while pushing institutions towards truth-telling and action. These examples, however incomplete, show how rigorous research does more than describe problems. It has saved lives, changed systems, and built paths to justice. This work is not easy, and at times it requires courage, though it should not have to. Consider the recent stabbing of a gender studies professor and students during a lecture at the University of Waterloo. The attacker admitted to deliberately targeting the class and in his manifesto expressed support for the gunman who live-streamed the killing of 51 people at mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand. He also referenced the massacre of 69 young people in Norway carried out in the name of xenophobic and Islamophobic ideologies. In this climate, professors in gender studies all over Canada and related fields increasingly fear for their safety. Many, including me, are now advised to avoid publicly posting our office or classroom locations and implement safety plans and trainings. This is not a healthy environment for fostering intellectual curiosity, open debate, or the free exchange of ideas. In my own work at the Islamophobia Research Hub, I strive to create methodologies that empower impacted communities. So, for instance, we're working with policymakers, labor organizers, service providers, and Muslim communities to study systemic barriers to the economic integration of Muslims in Canada. We're also examining the impacts of Islamophobic violence, such as the fatal attack on the Afzal family in London, Ontario, and the Quebec City mosque shooting, on the mental health and identity of young Muslims. These projects center community-based knowledge where lived experiences become a foundation for evidence-based change. However, this kind of research is not easy to sustain under current Tri-Council funding structures. This leads me to my second point. Federal funding must be structured in ways that make community academic partnerships more accessible, efficient, and sustainable. Community partnerships are heavily encouraged, but the support mechanisms are often inadequate. As someone who has been both a community partner and now a university researcher, I have seen both sides of this struggle. So, for example, with community partners, I co-wrote a 53-page SHRC application for a $23,000 Connections grant that was meant to focus on the experiences of Muslim women accessing shelters. We did not receive the grant, but what stayed with me was the enormous uncompensated labor I had to request from partners already overstretched in underfunded women's shelters. While SHRC now allows salary research allowances for community partners, streamlining the application and modernizing its outdated portal are crucial to fostering meaningful partnerships. The bottom line is this: Canada should fund good research. It should enable partnerships and reduce barriers, and it should do so without bias or political interference. At a time when academic freedom is under threat elsewhere, we have an opportunity and a responsibility to strengthen it here. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now proceed to Mr. Thomas. Mr. Thomas, you will have 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me speak today. My name is Robert Thomas, and I'm the president of the Society for Academic Freedom and Scholarship, a scholarly society founded in 1993 in Ontario to advocate for academic freedom and the merit principle in Canadian academia. I'm also an academic librarian at the University of Regina, where my work focuses primarily in the humanities and social sciences. Today, I would like to give arguments in support of 2 criteria that we believe are essential for a successful and principled national research environment. The first of these is a merit-based research funding and hiring decisions in Canadian research chairs and funded research. This is important. It is important to base decisions in a way that supports and encourages the most promising and meritorious research agendas. Canada needs, for instance, the best cancer, business and political science research. What Canada does not need is research where meritocratic excellence has been eclipsed by other government policy goals, whether or not these have laudatory aims. In particular, I refer to funding and hiring decisions where identity factors such as sex, gender, and race can displace focus on the individual's work itself. SAF provides 2 arguments to this point. The demographics of faculty in any particular discipline does not generally reflect the population at large, and outside of sex ratios is not always accurately known. As an example, engineering researchers are more likely to be male than our nursing ones. Demanding both disciplines have the same sex ratios flies in the face of reality. The other argument we make is a moral one. A scholar should be valued for his or her individual contribution. We believe that there is something dehumanizing about being funded or hired, either fully or in part, because of identity group factors. I will share a story about a colleague of ours, Augie, who works in sociology on the East Coast, and wrote a piece in the SAF's newsletter a few years ago. So he was talking to an unnamed colleague, trying to convince him in the importance of merit as a principle of academic choice, academic merit. And the unnamed colleague talked to Augie and said, when we were hiring you for this job, one of the things that we really liked about you is that you were gay and that it would bring more diversity to the department. This did not impress Augie because as he as he said in the article, he was hoping that his colleagues appreciated him as a competent sociologist and not as a competent homosexual. A second point is academic freedom and how it's affected by EDI statements and research. So the final point I'd like to make around equity, diversity, and inclusion statements, in our view, forcing researchers to voice support for EDI principles in their funding applications is a form of political and ideological attestation that should be considered anathema in a free society and is an extraneous criteria for funding. Some researchers may no doubt write such statements in good conscience. Others will have to outright lie or at least hide their real opinions in order to get the funding that allows them to do the work that they have passion for. Those in the middle will feign enthusiasm for a commitment to EDI that does not exist. I believe that this is detrimental both because it infringes on the moral autonomy of researchers, but also because it creates a false idea of broad agreement and assent, which may not well exist. Turkish-American academic Timur Kuran has written much about preference falsification, where individuals falsify their beliefs due to social pressures to conform. Many other people in these groups will follow suit, falsifying their beliefs as they see the buy-in by their colleagues as proof of the widespread acceptance of the official perspective. As Curran's research shows, buy-in can face grave problems as people inevitably discover that many in their circles are not actually true believers, but indeed are themselves obfuscating their actual beliefs. Long-term buy-in to contentious beliefs like EDI requires that people have the moral autonomy to dissent without risking censure, career, suicide. Mandating EDI statements of any kind in our view is unhealthy as it impinges on moral autonomy, but also self-defeating for EDI's proponents as it helps bury the arguments that need to be had for long-term acceptance. For these reasons, we believe that making funding decisions and hiring decisions based on identity factors and the requirement of EDI statements should not have any part in research funding criteria in Canada. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now proceed to Professor Kaufman. Professor Kaufman, please go ahead. You will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Thank you. There's really 2 points I would make. First is that there's a trade-off between excellence and equity in Canadian research, and the second is that EDI is political and not morally neutral. So I want to raise several concerns over aspects of research funding in Canada under the rubric of EDI. Main point I wish to make is that EDI, as practiced by the research councils, reflects a political left-wing view.
Sorry for interrupting. There is some interpretation issue. Yeah. Please, if you can stop for a minute.
Yes, just for 1 second.
Oh, sorry.
The interpreters need to have his face.
Have a look like... I'll suspend the meeting for a minute because there is some interpretation issue, so the meeting is suspended for a minute. to order. Before I ask Mr. Kaufman to go ahead, I just want to explain to the members that there are some technical issues and the interpreters will not be able to do the translation for Mr. Kaufman. So the solution which I have proposed is that as Mr. Kaufman has emailed us his opening remarks, he will read the opening remarks, and those are with the interpreters, and they will read that in the French. And in regards to the questions by the members, the solution is that the members can ask the question to Mr. Kaufman, and if he can send the written reply, I think that's the solution we can work on. Yes, Mr. Noor Mohammed.
Madam Chair, just from a timing standpoint, can you give us a sense of how late we're going to go, or what what the plan is?
Let me start, Mr. Kaufman. I will work on see what the resources are available, and some witnesses have to leave also. So based on that, I will let you know. So without delay, I will ask Mr. Kaufman to go ahead. You will have 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Okay. I wish to raise concern over several aspects of research funding in Canada that fall under the rubric of EDI. The main point I wish to make is that EDI, as practiced by the research councils, reflects a left-wing worldview I term cultural socialism. Cultural socialism consists of two tenets. First, diversity and equity, which means rather than equalizing outcomes by class, as in, say, Marxist socialism, outcomes should instead be equalized by race and sex through discrimination against, say, white men. Second, inclusion, that minority groups must be protected from emotional harm, even if this requires censoring free speech and limiting the pursuit of truth. This aspect of EDI underpins what's known as cancel culture. EDI is political, not neutral. When I asked a representative sample of 1,500 Canadians in September 2023 whether they approve of flying the pride flag on government buildings, those who identified as left-wing approved 63 to 24, while those who identified as right-wing disapproved 74 to 15. Centrists also disapproved by a more modest 42 to 35. The point here is that EDI questions expose wide political divides. Therefore, DEI is political. EDI is a dominant ethos of Canadian research funding councils, evident in both diversity statements on application forms and naked race and sex discrimination in hiring and funding calls. I'll make 3 points here about EDI. The first, most Canadians do not support it. I found that 59% of Canadians favored a colorblind approach to, quote, combating racism by treating people as individuals and trying not to see race, unquote, as against just 29% for a color-conscious approach involving, quote, combating racism by being made aware of race in order to better notice inequalities, unquote. In the US, a majority of people, including Black and Hispanic respondents, support the Supreme Court decision banning racial preferences in university admissions. Second point is that DEI reduces research excellence. Richard Sander famously showed that admitting Black students to law schools with lower entrance scores correlated with those students achieving lower grades. More recently, data collected for a 2024 study in the journal Nature showed that female academics had significantly lower numbers of citations than men, even when controlling for field of study and years in the profession. Black and Hispanic scholars had substantially fewer citations than whites and Asians, though the gap was not as large as for gender. This may reflect a form of societal inequality, but artificially narrowing the talent pipeline at award stage does not rectify this problem. It merely prioritizes equity over excellence. Third is that DEI creates the conditions for delegitimizing research funding. Confidence in higher education in the United States has fallen from nearly 60% in 2015 to just 36% by 2024. Among Republican voters, from 56% in 2015 to 20% in 2024. In Canada, the trust remains higher, but it is at risk. For instance, I find just 49% of Conservatives trust social science and humanities professors compared to 69% of those supporting the Liberal, NDP, and Green parties. This is still higher. Conservative support of 49% is still higher than the 34% trust I find among U.S. Republican voters. But this shows that once a sector becomes left-coded, it loses the confidence of conservative voters. Consider that only a quarter of Canadian conservative voters now trust the media, and that's approaching U.S. levels. and support for established institutions such as the CBC is in sharp decline. Why isn't this recognized? Well, 75 to 90% of Canadian academics, according to surveys, are on the left, with a quarter identifying as far left. As William Desarowich writes, they're therefore insulated from public opinion. This is why EDI heavily shapes grant assessment and hiring, despite being opposed by most voters. As the U.S. pattern shows, this is not sustainable. Public reaction to scenes on campus, especially since October the 7th, which have been informed by cultural socialism's outrider of settler colonialism, will only make this more salient. I strongly advise Canadian research councils to abandon their current focus on cultural socialism, or EDI, if they wish to retain public support. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now start with our round of questioning. Before I go ahead, we have the resources available until 6:45, so we will have to end the meeting at 6:45. So I'll start with Mr. Baldinelli. Mr. Baldinelli, you will have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being with us this afternoon. Dr. Sad, I'll begin with you. In your book, The Parasitic Mind, How Infectious Ideas Are Killing Common Sense, you write this: for decades now, a set of idea pathogens, largely stemming from universities, has relentlessly assaulted science, reason, logic, freedom of thought, freedom of speech, individual liberty, and individual dignity. If we want our children and grandchildren to grow up in free societies as we have done, then we have to be assured in our principles and stand ready to defend them. Earlier, we had Dr. Snow discuss some of his concerns. He had mentioned about an activist agenda having been embedded in funding applications, primarily in the social sciences and the humanities. So essentially, you're telling those looking for research to accept the narrative to get the funding. Should science not be about discovery and not accepting the narrative that some government bureaucrat or some university bureaucrat puts forward? And do you agree that we need to change this, and how?
Thank you for that question. Yes, of course, I think that we should change it. Look, the pursuit of truth is a deontological mechanism, meaning you don't say, I believe in truth, but, right? There is no consequentialist ethic when it comes to the wonder of discovery, the wonder of science, right? For example, in soccer, there's only been 8 countries that have won the World Cup, even though there are 200 countries that compete. Should we say that we should create more equitable outcomes? In marathon running, Ethiopia and Kenya have won most of the Boston marathons for the past 35 years. Jews have won nearly 25% of Nobel Prizes, even though they make up 0.2% of the world's population. So there are certain human endeavors that are organized along a meritocratic ethos. Science is one such endeavor, and we should do away with all this diversity, inclusion, and equity stuff because it harms science. I come from a very rough background. If there's ever anybody who's had a victimology story, it's me. And yet I stand before you proud in that I've overcome my rough childhood. I don't need the help of someone to be a dignified individual. That's what makes me meritorious, and I only wish that Canada would readopt that stance.
Thank you so much. Dr. Kaufman, thank you for your comments. And you had also appeared at committee here on November 28th in 2024. You had also appeared at the same time as Christopher Dummett. And some of the concerns that both of you had raised were with regards to the lack of viewpoint diversity. And in your testimony then, you had talked about, I would like to see the councils get ahead of the problem and move to a colorblind merit approach. Can you expand on that and what you would like to see and what recommendations you would make?
Yeah, I mean, there are 2 issues here. I mean, one is the question of meritocracy, that is non-discrimination on the basis of race and sex, which we've heard a lot about. There's also a point called viewpoint diversity, which is, I mentioned that 75 to 90% of academics in Canada, according to Chris Dummett's survey and Zach Patterson, were on the left. And so you have almost very few conservative voices from academia. We're seeing in the United States the implications that has or may have for the health of the higher education sector. if you create a hostile environment for certain beliefs, such as conservatism, then you are going to essentially force those people not to go down the academic pathway, and therefore deprive particularly the social sciences and humanities, politicized disciplines that need viewpoint diversity in order to arrive at the correct answer. They're not going to get that viewpoint diversity, and so you're going to get all kinds of research that's going to go way off track.
Mr. Thomas, for the Society for Academic Freedom and Scholarship, on the website, it indicates many universities have policies that are discriminatory to the extent that they favor groups of students or faculty on the basis of race, sex, etc. Such preferential treatment is unfair, is damaging to academic excellence, and stigmatizes the very groups so favored. So how does our university systems, the tri-council agencies, how do we go about fixing that?
I think we have to focus on merit. We have to focus on excellence and do away with the privileging of identity factors. So increasingly within universities in Canada, there are advertisements, which you may have heard of from other witnesses, that if you want a particular position, you need to have a particular race. You have to be Black, you have to be Indigenous, you have to be a woman, instead of focusing on an individual's abilities to best meet the needs of that science. So focusing on excellence on their actual production as an individual, instead of focusing on something that they, by an accident of fate, they are a particular race, a particular background. That they bring nothing, people don't bring that to the table per se. That is just something they are, rather than what they focus on with their work, which should be, that excellence should be the benefit we're looking for.
I think 2 seconds.
MP Noor Mohammed. MP Noor Mohammed, please go ahead. You will have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And maybe I'll start with you, Professor Saad, because I really did enjoy your book, The Sad Truth About Happiness. And sometimes in this profession, I think we live in some of those times. You know, listening to you today, I guess one of the questions that came to mind that I'd love if you could share with us is any empirical studies that you can cite that show that diversity initiatives actually harm the quality or objectivity of scientific research.
Thank you for your kind words. It's lovely to hear that people in the committee are reading my work, so thank you for that. I mean, I can certainly try to come. I don't have the citations in front of me, but there is no conceivable reason why diversity along my sexual orientation or my skin color or whether I'm two-spirit or non-binary is going to improve our capacity to map the human genome or better understand the distribution of prime numbers. Science liberates us from the shackles of our personal identities. It's an epistemological tool that democratizes our capacity to seek science. So by definition, science should be free of all that stuff. But if you want references, I can certainly try to whip some up for you.
I would love some, because in looking at the empirical data that I have seen, it shows that diverse teams tend to produce more innovative and higher impact research. And that's evidence. So, you know, that evidence means something. And so I'm trying to understand what the methodological problem there would actually be.
So you're right that there is some metrics of diversity that improve research quality. So for example, interdisciplinarity, where you're getting diverse expertise joining together to solve a problem, does lead to better outcomes. Some of the biggest and most important breakthroughs in science come at the intersections of disciplines. So interdisciplinary diversity does improve science. Whether on my team I have people that are exclusively homosexual or heterosexual or self-identify as Latinx or not, does not help me solve the distribution of prime numbers. It almost seems laughable that in the 21st century, I would have to make that point. So intellectual diversity does improve science. All of the other metrics of diversity don't.
Okay, so onto the basis of meritocracy, a lot of what you're saying is meritocracy should trump all. And as somebody who has spent most of my life making sure people didn't identify me or promote me or put me in positions because of my religion, my name, the color of my skin, et cetera, I'm a big believer in meritocracy. One of the challenges, though, that we've seen in Canada and in other parts of the world is that it's much harder to measure merit in systems where access to education, to funding and networks has historically been unequal. So how do we overcome that so that you are, in fact, getting exactly what you said, which is the widest diversity of viewpoints, such that you are able to do high-quality research?
Thank you. That's a great question. That's the tension between, which I'm sure you're familiar with, equality of outcomes and equality of opportunities. Any time that we find that there are lacking equality of opportunities, then we should intervene and try to solve these, right? 100 years ago, we didn't have women in medical schools. Today, we have more women than men. 100 years ago, most universities were populated by men. Now, at the bachelor's, master's, and doctoral level in the United States, women outnumber men across 5 racial categories. So wherever we see that there are truly systemic barriers to entry for any group, then we need to eradicate those. But that doesn't come from saying that only queer people who are non-binary get to be a professor of artificial intelligence at the University of Waterloo. I mean, imagine how insane that makes us look globally. Artificial intelligence is one of the hottest areas. One of the elite universities in Canada is going to choose its chaired professors based on whether they are Latinx or queer.
So let's just dig into this piece of it, because I want to make sure that what we're not saying is that, and maybe we are, I don't know, I mean, I'd love to hear from you and then Professor Coffin for, depending on how much time I have. Are we saying that by having diverse academics or people that are hired where those criteria also exist, that we are abandoning the merit principle? And if so, has quality research outcomes actually diminished because more diverse people have entered academia?
If the manner by which we've achieved diversity within those research groups stems from non-meritocratic ethos, then by definition, the quality of the research goes down. I wouldn't mind if every one of my postdocs were two-spirit, if they are the best people possible. If none of them are two-spirit, so be it.
But I guess my question more is, though, are you seeing that academic outcomes and research is diminished because those types of individuals who come from quote-unquote equity-seeking backgrounds are now producing research, or is the research quality the same or better?
I mean, I don't have the empirical evidence, but surely we can just argue it philosophically, right? I mean, how could it be that University of Waterloo is looking for chaired professors in artificial intelligence based on the gender orientation of the computer scientists?
No, my question is more, have you seen evidence, have you seen examples of where people have been hired to do high-quality research that are less good because diversity criteria were applied?
I mean, I couldn't give personal anecdotes because I don't use those metrics. As a matter of fact,
sorry for interrupting. Time is up for Mr. Noor Mohammed. We will now proceed to Mr. Blanchet Yonka. Please go ahead. You will have 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je salue les témoins qui sont avec nous.
Thank you. Greetings to witnesses here for this important study. My first question goes to Dr. Saad. You talked about the ideological parasitization of universities when we talk about federal grants. Is this not transforming funding organizations into political instruments? Is this not undermining the trust of the public?
I didn't have my translation thing on, but I speak fluent French, so no problem. Of course, it affects the trust that the public has in us, right? I mean, I've sat on committees, on SHIRK committees for graduate funding, where every single grant application in important fields in the social sciences is about queering this and indigenizing that. How could that make sense? I teach evolutionary psychology and psychology of decision-making. What does it mean to indigenize and decolonize the study of psychology of decision-making? It's absolutely laughable, right? Science liberates me from my sexual orientation. It liberates me from my skin color. It liberates me from my sexual orientation. That's what makes science beautiful. So of course the trust of the public and the taxpayer is damaged when we allow these parasitic ideas to infect our university ecosystems. It's grotesque. It's tragic.
Vous avez travaillé des deux côtés de la frontière. On sait que plusieurs...
We know that many American states have started abolishing DI policies, but even before the re-election of Donald Trump, are we seeing any positive impact on research there? Would Canada not find itself in trouble if it insists on the policy?
Of all this diversity, inclusion, equity stuff in the United States, certainly the election of Donald Trump has accelerated that. I see no autocorrection taking place in Canada. If anything, I see the doubling down of all of the parasitic nonsense in Canada. Again, I can't cite you specific empirical studies that point one way or to the other, but again, science is a fully meritocratic thing. Nobody gives a damn about your identity markers. The best people should be doing the best science, period.
Aux États-Unis, on voit
In the US, we've seen a drop in DI policies, whereas we're doing the opposite here in Canada. Does this not risk isolating our research and affecting our young people at a time when meritocracy remains the standard? You who are here are good examples.
As a matter of fact, I've taken a leave from Concordia University, and I'm currently at the University of Mississippi at a center that is rooted in American freedom, precisely for that reason. I stopped applying for research grants and applying for a chaired professorship in 2018 because I wasn't willing to play the game of doing a diversity, inclusion, and equity statement. I can't be the guy who wrote the parasitic mind and then when nobody is looking, play along. And so I've not had any research funds for 7 years. I've now left to the United States precisely because of all these parasitic ideas. So if you could imagine that both myself and Professor Kaufman have left, you could imagine that many other people who should be staying in Canada will decide to go elsewhere where they can pursue their research free of identity markers.
Professeur Saad, une étude publiée par la Fondation Aristotle cette année a montré que 98% des annonces d'emploi.
Professor Saad showed that some studies in Canada had DEI criteria in Canada, sometimes mandatory. If in employment we see that the DEI policy is becoming a condition of employment, by imposing the same conditions on funding, are we not displacing what scientific excellence is supposed to be?
I quoted this in my opening remarks. It's 97.5% of job applications, academic job applications, have DEI as a central feature of the application. Again, that is grotesque. I know for a fact that at one point I was applying for a renewal of my chaired professorship. I held a university-wide chair for 10 years at Concordia. When it came time to reapply, someone told me confidentially that, sorry, we couldn't give it to you, even though you would be easily deserving of it because it had to go to a woman. How do you think that makes me feel? I worked 32 years as a professor. I lose because I don't ovulate. Does that strike you as fair?
Dans la même étude, on apprend qu'à l'université.
In the same study, we hear that the British Columbia University limits positions to a race or group identity or an ethnic group. Is this the opposite of meritocracy? Is there no danger here that we could find this logic in funding of research by Ottawa?
Research granting process or in the job application process, even the tenure decision has been fully parasitized by all of this nonsense. There was a professor at UBC that didn't get tenure because she hadn't published much. She then went ahead to the Human Rights Tribunal and argued that she is indigenous and she comes from an oral tradition. So, forcing her to write things as a publication went against her culture. Imagine that this is something that the Human Rights Tribunal actually listens. It's unbelievable. And the quicker we get... Now, look, I want to live in a bigot-free society. I come from Lebanon, where I faced a lot of bigotry. So I understand what bigotry is. But the way to solve bigotry is not to impose reverse bigotry.
Quand des critères comme l'équité...
When we see DI criteria becoming mandatory for employment and funding, are we not creating a closed circle instead of putting value on this?
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? For example, professors, as Professor Kaufman said, don't usually hire anybody that has any political position that is contrary to theirs. That's why in some disciplines, and these studies have been done, and I can share you those references, in the activist social sciences, you are more likely to run into a unicorn than to run into a Republican or conservative sociologist. You're more likely to run into a horse that has wings than to run into a Republican psychologist. Imagine That's not a good thing. There are very good ideas on the left. There are very good ideas on the right. Our students would benefit from hearing the totality of ideas.
Beaucoup de chercheurs disent.
Lots of researchers say that there are grants.
Sorry for that. Now we will proceed to Mr. Ho. Mr. Ho, you will have 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Madam Chair. My question is for Professor Saad. It's an honor to have you here on this committee. You mentioned that DEI is an affront of individual dignity. So I was just wondering if you could elaborate on that a little bit more, and whether you agree that DEI is a form of government-sponsored top-down ideology.
I mean, absolutely. What greater manifestation of ideological top-down stuff than DEI, right? I mean, I present myself to the world as Gad Saad. Part of me being Gad Saad is I have green eyes. Part of me being Gad Saad is I come from Lebanon. Part of me being Gad Saad is I'm a certain height. I've got some merits. I've got some faults. So I am an individual, and I ask you to judge me as an individual first. The reason why I love science is because when I do my science, I'm trying to discover something interesting about the world. And that phenomenon that I'm studying exists independently of my identity. That's what makes science beautiful. It liberates us from our shackles. So that's what I mean when I say it's an affront to individual dignity. All of the members of this committee are worthy individuals because they are individuals. So I'm first Gad Saad, and then I'm a member of a group. So nothing could be worse than to create collective tribalism in the pursuit of science.
Well, thank you. And we've seen DEI essentially replace meritocracy and this liberal top-down ideology in federal research, and which is, by the way, funded by taxpayers. So it's essentially a government-sponsored ideology that's being implemented onto our public institutions. So, do you think that this has an effect of censoring academic freedoms and has the effect of being reverse discriminatory on groups that are considered not adhering to DEI?
It has a huge effect on censorship. The most dangerous censorship is self-censorship. So I receive thousands of emails that always say the exact same thing. Dear Professor Saad, there's a bunch of compliments, and at the end it's, if you decide to read this email on your show, please don't mention my name. And the person who writes it is a postdoc, is a doctoral student, is a professor, all of whom are happy that I have the courage to say what I say. They would love to say it, but they know that if they do, they will lose their position in the lab, they will lose their position for funding, and so on and so forth. This is not Yemen. This is not North Korea. This is not communist China. This is happening in Canada and the United States.
Wow.
This is grotesque.
Yeah, I mean, let's go back to basics. DEI is supposed to be something, purportedly supposed to create a fair, inclusive, and an environment that's supposed to address historical marginalizations, but it sounds like it's creating the opposite effect. It's unfair, it's exclusionary, and it's actually marginalizing those who have differing viewpoints, which again goes against the purpose of academic research, is the pursuit of knowledge creation. Would you agree that this is affecting Canadians' trust in public institutions? We've seen the lack of public trust by Canadians in public institutions at an all-time low, and it's no coincidence that it's after 10 years of liberal top-down ideology being implemented on public institutions. So do you think it hurts our reputation globally?
Of course it does, right? I mean, one of the reasons why I've been able to build I'm thankful to have built such a large platform is because the message that I share with the wider audience is one that resonates with people, right? So when I exist in the rarefied ivory tower, then I'm viewed as a pariah, right? Because I don't say the things that I'm supposed to say. But the larger audience, the trucker, the corrections officer, the police officer, they're all writing to me and saying, oh my God, I wish my son or daughter had you as a professor. Look, being a professor is a privilege. It's a place where you can be a free thinker. The reality, though, it's an Orwellian, Kafkaesque world where everybody is afraid to utter one syllable out of place, lest they might be fired or somebody might find out that they don't love Justin Trudeau or that they love Donald Trump. This is not what we want in our academics. We want them to be free thinkers.
And this Liberal government is doubling down, it sounds like. It's actually making it even worse. So what has DI actually achieved? What do you think? Has it destroyed more than it's actually built?
I mean, 1,000%, right? I could show you tons of emails where someone wrote to me saying, I was thinking of going to academia, but I know that I am...
Sorry for interrupting. Time is up for Mr. Ho. We will now proceed to MP Jessic for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Chair. Dr. Hassan, I would like to bring you into this conversation. You've obviously heard the other panelists during this hour, and perhaps you heard some of the earlier testimony when we started today. There has overall been, I would say, through the course of the study, some agreement that in terms of study design, diversity in terms of EDI is actually useful in terms of the content of the research, and also to a certain extent that having diverse teams is also of value in terms of training new researchers and so on. A lot of the conversation seems to be today related very much to the Canada Research Chairs and various equity targets and so on. Do you have some thoughts on the current situation as it relates to Canada Research Chairs?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. I guess I want to kind of start off by just reminding everyone that the reason why these programs have come about, regardless of how imperfect they are, is that they're trying to solve a problem. And that problem is pretty well documented. So I have a list of studies that I can cite I'm happy to submit them to you after the fact, but there's studies about gender biases in research funding awards. There's studies about biases against people who are racialized in research studies, and also the experiences of faculty from marginalized communities, postdoctoral fellows from marginalized communities that document how, there continues to be a problem of bias and prejudice in some of our funding programs in Canada. So these are coming about in the spirit of solving a problem. Now, I agree that there are, I'm absolutely against anything that tokenizes or would tokenize me, for example, as, a South Asian Muslim woman. But I'm also against things that are performative and that don't actually work. The reality is, and the research shows, the evidence very clearly shows that diversity in research produces better impact in research studies. It produces better innovation. It widens our epistemology. It widens the way we think. It widens the way people address problems. And it widens the way we include more and more people. We're trying to address an issue of exclusion here, and a pretty serious one that is very well documented. And I don't think that having Canada Research Chairs that are dedicated to certain areas of research is that unusual. We have focused grants on things like cancer research. We have focused grants on things like AI. We have focused grants on things like cancer survivorship, cannabis usage. There's so many areas where, the research community decides through various processes what are some of the pressing problems of our time and how can we leverage research to try to solve them. So I don't see anything wrong with Canada Research Chairs that are focused on specific issues. I think it's helpful to start building research communities on specific topics that require our urgent attention.
Are you aware of any peer-reviewed studies that show that diversity initiatives actually harm research quality?
I am not aware of any peer-reviewed studies that demonstrate that. In fact, I know more studies have shown the opposite. And I know you've heard from Dr. Melinda Smith, who was here a few days ago and testified in front of this committee, but she has done incredible work in on this topic and figuring out like how we understand the role of diversity in research.
Thank you so much for that. And perhaps you could elaborate a little bit further on some of the benefits of actually establishing targets. Our analysts have given us some of the information as it relates to Canada research chairs, and over time, they seem to show that there are various groups that have been underrepresented in terms of research chairs, actually increasing in numbers. Could you speak a little bit to some of those groups?
Sorry for interrupting. Time is up. If I can request Dr. Hassan to please respond to this question and by submitting the answers, and we will then circulate to all the members. We will end this panel with Mr. Blanchet-Jonca for 2.5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Madame la Présidente, Professeur Saad.
Professor Saad, when Ottawa is talking about inclusive excellence, is this not contradiction in the use of terms? Are we not taking out excellence from its primary definition by relying on this ideological basis?
Please, you are on mute. Yes.
I was going to say, you're absolutely right. The term excellence and inclusion don't belong in the same sentence. Again, some people on this panel have said that there is unequivocal evidence that supports the fact that diverse research or teams leads to better outcomes. It depends, again, how you measure diversity. As I mentioned earlier, if you measure diversity as, for example, interdisciplinarity, then that form of diversity does improve scientific outcomes because you're getting people that have different areas of expertise that are joining together to solve a common problem. But I would challenge anybody on this committee to tell me how whether I am queer or not will help me improve quantum computing. I'm open to hearing that explanation. But until you show me how my sexual orientation affects my understanding of the distribution of prime numbers, I don't think that those metrics affect research excellence, and they should be made null and void.
Professeur Saad, est-ce que l'imposition de critères idéologiques dans...
Imposing ideological criteria in employment and research, could this undermine the image of Canada because it's giving us the idea that we are giving priority?
People who've written to me who thought, hey, should I come to Canada? I've read your stuff, Professor Saad. I've read your material. Is it as bad as people say that it is? I say, look, there are wonderful things in Canada. There are amazing researchers in Canada. But yes, we are an ultra woke country. We do suffer from stage 4 suicidal empathy. And if you are white, if you are heterosexual, if you are Christian, well, good luck, because you're going to be behind the 8 ball. Those are not words that I should ever be uttering. Anybody should be able to participate in the democratic pursuit of science.
Thank you. And with that, I would like to thank all the 4 witnesses. Sorry for some technical issues, but thank you for joining us. And I know it's like almost close to midnight for Mr. Kaufman. So thank you for joining us. And before we end this, before I just like to inform all the members that for next week, we will not be having a meeting on Monday as the Parliament is not sitting. So the next meeting of the committee will be October 1st, and we will have the Social Sciences and the Humanities Research Council and Natural Sciences Engineering Research Council of Canada and the Canadian Institutes of Health Research appearing for 1 hour, as per the motion adopted on Wednesday, September 17th. And for the second hour, we will be having committee business. So thank you to the witnesses. And do I have the consensus to adjourn the meeting? Okay, the meeting is adjourned.